liquid moly. Oh. Very smooth. Not bad. This is not the original cluster, which is why these lights are on. Most of them are blank. The original cluster had the analog odometer, which stopped at 105,000. This is roughly reading 10,000 kilometers more than it actually has. It's got about 240 to 245. First start in 2 months. Why does it keep turning itself on? Old school. central locking pump went out a couple of months ago, finally, after 32 years. It's a pre-facelift model with a nice handmade walnut sliders, which were replaced with a plastic rubbery, kind of similar to this material. There's a lot of paperwork. As you saw, the original first aid kit. And also the original cassette manual. Unfortunately, the original head unit's long gone, as is the CD changer in the boot. But I like CDs. Everything works, including the electric rear view mirror. This is the mirror fold. Oh, tell a lie. Not everything works. The windows go down, but they struggle to go back up without assistance. Only the driver's window works reliably, which is fine. All the seats work. Everything works on the seats, even the memory. Central locking, the pump, as I mentioned, burnt out. We've got a new pump to put in. Pretty much everything's had a cover on it since new, so everything's in very good condition. The rear seats were never used until I bought it in 2020, 4 years ago. There's one little scratch on the leather from the baby seat, which I'm not happy about. Another thing that doesn't work is the aircon. I'm not sure if it needs regassing. It used to work. Another common fault is the lumbar support. They have airbags in the seats, which after 30 odd years have ruptured. And I just noticed the armrest is getting a little worn there. Never noticed that before. A lot of water in there. How does water sit in there? It normally has a handle that flips out here, That stopped working when I unplugged the vacuum pump for the central locking because it works off the same system. Tie up my victims. Battery's under there somewhere. It's apparently still fine since it started after 2 months. Did not have to touch the battery or jump it. This is where the original CD stacker would have bolted to, but now I've got a nice storage pocket instead. Now, a common fault on these, after the age at least, is the rubber. There's a rubber insert inside this plastic housing which cracks, and I had a pretty serious boot leak. That I've had to silicone up because they're impossible to find. It's not the best job, but I'll get around to it eventually. I'm currently looking for the new gasket to go inside there. It's in excellent shape apart from one little knock there. Someone ran into me on the highway, drove off, and left me with this. That was there when I bought it. So I bought it off a retired couple, and it was probably about time they retired their license as well. A couple of major stone chips from living in a rural area. And on Christmas Day we had a tornado which took half of that tree out there. You can see where it snapped there. My car was parked where the Peugeot is, and that half of the tree landed on this corner of the car. Can't really see it, but there you go. It's a hefty scrape, not too bad. The rest of it's just cosmetic. I drove this car nearly 7 days a week since 2020, up until a couple of months ago when I decided it was getting too expensive to run, costing me about $250 a week in fuel. So I found a 2-litre HDI diesel 6-speed manual Peugeot to replace it, which uses roughly the third of the amount of fuel. So that's been great. Which means now that the 300 SE is no longer in daily service, I'm going to start bringing it back to a former glory. Very good engine. It's quieting down a bit now. Never ever had a mechanical issue with this. These engines are genuinely bulletproof. I had a alternator bearing go, which I replaced in the garage. I think it cost me $9 for a new bearing. I had the main pulley that the fan bolts to go, and that was a really hard to find part. Had to get one of those from the UK and wait 3 weeks for it. Other than that, the engine itself has been flawless. Replaced the wiring harness, which is standard procedure on these, because it does degrade over time. You can see the exposed wiring. Other than that, just general maintenance. One thing I will note is that these do like to leak oil. This is, which will come as a shock to anyone familiar with these engines, the original head gasket. After 32 years, from almost 250,000 kilometers, but it does leak. It really does leak. Probably, it's not terrible, maybe half a litre per 1,000 kilometers max, which some brand new engines burn more than that these days, so I can't complain. I check maybe 3 or 4 times a week all fluid levels, just to make sure, you know, there could be new leaks develop on something this age, but the whole cooling system are replaced, just as preventive. All the hoses were original, water pump, thermostat, sensors, radiator, fan clutch, tank cap, all got replaced about a year ago. Did a bit of a hot weather mod as well. There's two really. The thermostat I replaced with one from a OM617 300B from a W140, which run at 76 Celsius instead of, I believe, 83, 84. And I also added a 1000 ohm resistor on the cooling fan sensor. So what that does is it kicks the cooling fans in at around 85 degrees instead of 105 degrees, which I think is way excessive. As a result, the sorry, I'll keep getting a flash of my shirtless self in the mirrors and the windows. As a result, the temperature sits flat at 80, whether I'm going up mountains in the middle of summer, whether I'm sitting in traffic, whether I'm just cruising along doing 60, 70 in winter. It always sits flat at 80 now, where it used to get, you know, uncomfortably high, you know, close to the 120 mark, which is apparently normal, but I don't like those fluctuations in temperature, especially not on something this old, and especially not something that's already prone to leaks. Fuel system is 100% original, including the fuel pumps. All the injectors have never been touched. The fuel pressure regulator is still original. Never had any issues with that. I did replace the whole ignition system, which just includes the spark plugs, the cables, the distributor. The rotor arm is back to the original, which is date stamp 1991. I replaced it with I think it was a Baru unit, which blew after about 50 kilometers and left me stranded. So I bought 2 of them, I replaced it with the other one, took it out for a spin and it left me stranded again, so I swapped back to the original Bosch rotor arm, which is still spinning after 32 years. I do have a spare Bosch one in the garage though, should that one ever have an issue. No vacuum leaks either, as far as I'm aware. Not too many issues with the transmission. It has a 722.34 speed, which is fully hydraulic. No finicky electronics involved there. I had the pleasure of giving it its first service, I believe, about 3 years ago, because the transmission filter was still the original. Shifts perfectly moving forward. It is a little bit hard in between shifts though. Reverse gear, famously on these units, can be problematic. It can start to, it's starting to grind when you're in reverse gear. And that's normally a sign the clutch plates have worn to the point where it's actually hitting the back of the tunnel, or bell housing even. I believe. I've not actually been in there yet. It still goes straight into reverse though, it's not, there's no delay yet. But it is really quiet, still. See how long it takes to go in gear. Straight away. Unless you floor it, these things set off in second gear. The only way to get it to set off in first is to put your foot flat to the floor, so you can feel the floor behind the pedal, or drop it into second and it'll just shift from first to second. Even if you put it in 3, you just get gears 2 and 3. Drive is generally just 2, 3 and 4, again unless you floor it, which is fine, it still pulls away fine. Wow, it's ridiculously smooth. I'm used to the Peugeot now. There are just 0 vibrations anywhere to be felt in this car. Let's get a... Oh, I did replace the engine mounts as well. The original ones were terrible. And I bodged this up for an engine shot. Do it. And of course, let's get that all-important exhaust shot, which will be disappointing because this is the very original, very quiet exhaust. Gonna get a nice spot for that. Smells delicious. Can smell a little bit of oil though as well as lots of fuel. So I might have to check that footage for a bit of smoke, but it's been sat for a long time, so I wouldn't be surprised if a little bit of oil has leaked past the valve seals, or there'll be some oil sitting somewhere in there. It's an old engine. The fans have finally kicked in, now it's reached 85 degrees Celsius, which is what we want to hear. Because, if you haven't noticed, this is Australia, despite my accent. Which is why I've got these ridiculous old European cars, because that's another very bizarre car to own in Australia. Some of my other cars have all been domestics, big 6-cylinder engines. Never owned an 8 because too much fuel. Let's go for a walk. Down here I have my written off AU Falcon, which is a Ford if you're not familiar. Year 2000 model. That was my first car that I bought when I moved to Australia 12 years ago at the age of 18. Put 360,000 kilometers on it, and then someone drove into me doing 70 k's an hour. So that's been, I bought that back off insurance. That whole front end's missing, but it still runs and drives. The car that hit me was a Toyota Hilux. That is gone. That did not start or drive or run. My plan with that is, despite it being written off, it's 5 years ago, more than 5 years ago now, is to just put a new radiator into it and somehow graft it in there and keep it as a farm pig. But that is what this replaced. Pretty good replacement. I don't think I'll ever get rid of this thing. One more thing to look out for is they have astronomical tyre wear. These are quite new. They're perfectly fine on the inside. Plenty of tread. Not so much on the outside. This can be caused by the lower control arm bushings, which, given the sheer heft of these things, they tend to chew up the suspension bushings in the front particularly. Rear's not too much of an issue, although it's getting a bit of a interesting camber going on there, which is most likely the spring sagging, again from the heft. The shock absorbers as well, they're original, but they could probably do with replacing. They don't look leaky or anything, but let me tell you, they're not doing much. It's a very heavy duty set here. These things really are built like nothing else. Extremely heavy duty. But yeah, obviously the sacrificial point of these suspension setups are the rubber bushings, lower control arm bushings in particular. They cause a bit of a shake in the steering wheel when you do between 80 to roughly 90 kilometers an hour, which is about 55 miles an hour. But either side of that, it's totally smooth again, so I'll try and avoid that speed. But the annoying part is that's pretty much what 90% of the limits are set to around here, so I spend most of my time in the shaky zone. But not much more to report on this. The wipers on these are excellent, as you can see. They're quite intricate in that the wiper, you know, it's on like they zigzag in and out, at least on this side, to try and cover as much as possible. So you can see, although it's wipers generally have a round curve, this one's actually quite flat because of the strange motion that they have. With a bit of wonderful engineering, really. Can't really see it too much. Yeah, it like extends out. No, she is very quiet. Let's get inside actually. See what we can hear from the inside. Close it up. What I am going to do is... there we go. Right. Very smooth again, no vibrations. Steering is extremely light. This doesn't have the variable intensity steering, whatever it was called, where it stiffens up as you get faster. I don't think, at least, I haven't noticed. It's just really light the whole time. It sounds great, and there are zero vibrations, no issues, full oil pressure. Temperature's flat at 80, as I said. Even with the fans going now, it's just very well made car. I think that's it. I might do a video on the Peugeot actually. I've got plenty of spare time today. One thing I did forget to mention is, so down at the back here, where the oil filter housing lives. That's attached to an oil cooler. Now you have a little heat transfer unit, little radiator inside there that runs the oil through the coolant, or vice versa. The seals on those have a habit of going. They have a rubber gasket inside them, and it puts a tiny amount of oil inside your coolant. It's a common misconception that because these have head gasket issues, that the oil entering your coolant is from the head gasket, which is not normally the case. It could happen, but the oil leaks, the head gasket leaks on these are external oil leaks only, almost exclusively. I've never really heard of overheating issues from head gasket leaks, oil in coolant, vice versa. So one thing I have to do every so often, maybe once a week, is get some like lint-free wipes and wipe the oil out the top of it. All collects underneath the cap here. It's not like it's sitting in the system anywhere. It all collects at the highest point, which is the top of the reservoir tank. So yeah, it normally means, but they are hard to find, that the rubber gasket in the oil cooler all the way down there, and then under there some more, that needs replacing. When I find one, I might do it, now that I'm not relying on this every single day. It's time to do a hot start and drive. Easy. Sorry if the camera's shaky, I'm not using my proper camera mounting equipment. Oh yes, I'm very sorry about that. Much better. Probably doesn't help that I've got noisy sunshade right behind the camera. There we go. So cruising is very smooth and quiet. Bit of a kick now. Be careful of the neighbours. Feel like a boss behind the wheel of this thing, looking down that huge bonnet at that emblem. See if I can get it to kick into first gear down here, eh? I have to be careful because there's a lot of gravel, and they can be tail happy, especially when it's wet or on loose surfaces. God, I miss driving this thing. Alright. Let's have a bit of a kick down, trying to piss off the neighbours. There it is. Oh yeah, there it is. Actually goes alright. For such a small engine, 3.2 litre, M104 990, which is like the hybrid between the old Jetronic system and the, I forgot what they were called, HF fuel injected systems. This is the LH injection, so it's got fuel injection, it's got the old cast alloy intake manifold, but it also has the distributor and rotor, and it also has the EZL, which is like the ignition control module, which can be a little bit problematic, normally due to the heat sinkage issues, but I replaced the heatsink paste on the back of it on this thing last year. It's still fine. I have a spare one in the garage should it ever die on me. Which sits, those things sit under the plastic panel to the right when you open the engine bay, next to the airbox. Look at this. What's wrong with this now? What happened? There we go. Nice AliExpress dash mat. The only place I could find one. Shut it down.